Welcome to the Go-to-Market Gap series. I'm Lucas Welch, HighSpot's VP of Corporate and Demand Marketing, where we're exploring one of the biggest challenges facing go-to-market organizations today, the growing disconnect between strategy and execution. Based on findings from our most recent Go-to-Market Gap report, we're now sitting down with leaders across revenue, sales, enablement, marketing, and operations teams to understand why execution remains so difficult in the AI era and what you can do about it. In each episode, we'll unpack what's really happening inside modern go-to-market teams, where the execution's breaking down, and what winning organizations are doing differently so you can learn from them and apply those learnings to your own growth and success. Today, I am delighted to be joined by one of the most charismatic sales leaders I've ever met, the one, the only Stu Gammon, our CRO. Stu, thank you so much for being here.
Great intro. Thank you, Lucas. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. You deserve it. And so as a CRO, Stu, you've got a revenue leader's perspective day in and day out on the gap between strategic planning and execution. Of course, how we've closed that gap here at HighSpot, but in your work with so many prospects and customers, I think you have a really unique lens to bring to the table in terms of what is and isn't working. And so I like to crack on, as we say, and get right into it, because I think often leaders overestimate the ability to execute go-to-market initiatives and how consistent things really are on the front line. Why do you believe leaders are overestimating how much of their strategy is actually landing and being executed?
It's a great question. I think we're in a very fortunate position that we're selling a platform that we kind of live and breathe with all our lives. And for the last 30 years in go-to-market organizations, I've been dealing with the same problem. So when we think about execution, a lot of us confuse motion with execution. And so the strategy's been communicated, the teams have been briefed, the quarter is underway. So it feels like that execution is happening, right? You've got momentum. We look at the dashboards, we see green, we move on. But if you actually look at how the deals are progressing and how consistently your teams are running your go-to-market motion, whether the strategy is translating into customer conversation, there's often that gap between what was designed at the top and then what's being delivered in the field. And if we look at the research we've done, right, we know this. So almost every go-to-market leader says their strategy is in motion. So you've got the motion part of it, but barely 1 in 10 are actually saying it's executing effectively. So the gap isn't about the intent, it's about the difference between having the plan and then the operating system that delivers on it. And that's what I think the industry is starting to wake up to. And I say starting to wake up. Different parts of different industries are at different levels of that maturity gap, right? But it's starting to wake up. And what you're seeing now, I think, is more and more CROs are talking about execution as the strategy, not
Mhm.
something that happens after strategy. And I think that's the position.
Yeah, you can't mistake motion for real progress, nor consistency of execution. And we continue, as you said in the stats that you cited, we continue to see this gap. I think, as you stated correctly, people are starting to wake up to it, but they haven't necessarily closed it. And so there definitely are many organizations that have this disconnect between strategy and execution that may be mistaking motion for real progress. Where do
100%.
you see that disconnect show up most in the organizations that you've worked with in your role here at HighSpot?
I think for most of the organizations I've worked at a high spot, and certainly organizations I've worked at in the past, I've kind of narrowed it down to the operating model, right? So
Mm.
it's narrowed it down. That's a pretty broad position, right? But it's that connective tissue between the strategy and the field. So as I said before, strategy at the top, and then it's how it translates. So
Mhm.
many people look at it and think it's a problem of it or a tools problem. People problem or a tools problem. But often it's how do those pieces connect, right? So strategy gets set. There's no operating rhythm that translates it, how the deals get done, how pipeline gets built, how cross-functional teams coordinate week to week, right? We see that show up a lot. Sales is running one motion, marketing is running another motion, and then the CS teams are hearing something completely different from the customers, right? So you've got 3 or 4 groups all thinking they're doing the same thing, but actually not connected in the slightest. And so it's hard, and not many people get to a position where they can share a view of what good execution actually looks like in a consistent way. So how do you know that the machine is actually running as it was designed, right? So that's what I mean by an operating model problem. It's not any single function or a tool that's broken. It's the way that strategy flows through the people, the processes, and the accountability structures, right, to actually reach the customer. And at the end of the day, it's all about the customer, right? It's not about what you're doing internally, it's about the outcome of the customer. And I think that's where the challenge is. So there are still many organizations that I see that have not defined they go to market as an integrated cross-functional framework, right? So
Mm-hmm.
most are still treating it as a collection of siloed activities. So if you
Yeah.
do that, you end up with more tools, more data, more content, and yet the teams get more and more fragmented as you add more of what is helping, right? You add more of that in, it gets more fragmented. And that's where I think the disconnect is between the strategy and the people. It's
Yeah.
between
And people
strategy
are,
and the operating model. Exactly.
yeah, people are trying to do their best work, but to your point about if they're really just a collection of parts versus an integrated whole, you have them going heads down in various teams, various silos, doing what they believe is the right thing, maybe even thinking it's connected to that overall strategy the leader feels so confident in. But, every little bit of disconnected activity, as you said earlier, motion is going to pull people further away from what the true purpose is, which whatever that end result of success for the customer is. And then if teams don't view themselves collectively accountable for that customer's success, whose eyes are on the customer at the end of the day. And I think that operating model issue is one that, obviously we can help organizations solve, but many organizations still face. And hopefully our conversation here today, maybe a little look at HighSpot may help them over time. Now, we did see upside in our research, and that was that the respondents estimated that if they could gain more consistent performance, they believe they could increase revenue by at least 8.5% over the next 12 months, which for $1 billion business, that's 85 million in potential upside, which could definitely change how your board or even the public markets are feeling about your delivery and your performance. So that's real upside. But on the flip side, I think there are hidden costs of inconsistent execution that may not show up on the scorecard until it's too late. What are some of those hidden costs that you see from the lack of connection between strategy and execution?
Yeah, you're 100% right. And as you use that example, billion-dollar company, the numbers rack up pretty quickly. Small percentages of big numbers are big numbers, right? So, from an inconsistency point of view, the biggest thing I see is predictability. And that may be that my role as a CRO, a lot of it has to be about how predictable are we as a business, right? So, when the execution is inconsistent, you end up with a forecast based on variance, not on signal, right? And
Mm,
so you end up with the best reps, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of people that understand and have seen this themselves. The best reps carry a disproportionate share of the number, while the middle of the team underperforms against their potential. And it becomes very difficult to diagnose why, because you're only measuring the outcomes, not the operating behaviors that drive them. So and you'll see a common theme in my answers, right? So all around operating cadence and behaviors, you get that right, then the outcomes become
mhm.
stronger and you can understand how to fix it. So the reality now is the penalty for that inconsistency has gone up dramatically, right? We know that buying committees have nearly doubled in size over the last decade or so. So you've got a dozen or more stakeholders on the buyer side, each interacting with different people across your org, so sales, solutions, customer success. And when those interactions don't hang together, you end up with longer sales cycles, stalled deals, reduction in win rates, for example. So the compounding cost in velocity, margin, retention is enormous, right? And those are the things we're kind of keen on. So the
Mhm.
worst part of that is you got all that impact, but it's almost invisible in a quarterly review, right? You can see the symptoms, the slip deals, the longer cycles, the missed targets, but it's difficult to trace them back to a single cause because the root issue is systemic. It's systemic inconsistency across the go-to-market machine, exactly when your customers are demanding more than they ever have done before, right? So the two kind of magnify each other.
Yeah. Systemic inconsistency May be difficult to say after you've had a few pints, but thankfully, I think both you and I are sober and clear-minded to keep this conversation going. And it is one of those things where, as you said, it's showing up in some of the metrics, but getting back to the root cause of why those metrics aren't coming through the way we want to see them at the end of the quarter or the end of the fiscal can be a lot harder to diagnose. And I think AI has a role to play in either the good or the bad of that scenario, right? The bad can be AI creates more noise, even makes it harder to identify the root causes in that systemic inconsistency. Of course, if you can fix those gaps and build a stronger system, then AI can amplify and ultimately drive more consistency. So certainly you have your seat here at HighSpot, but you're talking to all sorts of organizations around the world about how they're thinking about AI overall for their go-to-market. What do you think is key for leaders to know in separating AI that drives real action that can change those outcomes and improve consistency versus AI that just makes noise and may actually obfuscate and make it harder for teams to be consistent?
Yeah, it's funny. You can't have any conversation anymore without the word AI, right? I mean, it's
Hey,
front
we
and
made it
center
like
of
10
literally
minutes though, Stu.
10
I
minutes.
think we made it like a good 10 minutes without mentioning AI, which
There
I
was
really
always an
did.
undertone, Lucas. It was coming, right?
It's
Um,
always somewhere.
yeah. So look, it's you've got to ask that one question: does it make GTM machine run better? Right? Not is it smart? Does it actually help the teams execute with more speed, precision, consistency? So if AI is surfacing intelligence that helps a seller advance a deal, helps a manager identify risk earlier, helps an ops leader see where emotion is breaking down, then that's performance leverage, right? And so if it's generating outputs that nobody acts on or living in a tool when nobody actually uses as part of their workflow, it's just more noise, right? And I think that's the big difference. It's is it providing leverage or is it just providing noise? And I think in
Hmm.
truth, most organizations haven't meaningfully integrated AI into how they actually sell yet. They've deployed it, they've announced it, but it's not in the workflow. And so a big reason is that most teams, and I think this is true, are putting AI onto a broken foundation, bad data, undefined processes, fragmented systems. So AI is amplifying whatever it's plugged into. And so if the foundation is chaos, you get faster chaos. And it's funny
Hmm.
because if I go back 15, 20, I'm showing my age, but probably 20, 25 years when digital transformation was a big thing, not that it isn't anymore, but it was kind of the up and coming. The biggest challenge with digital transformation was putting a software layer on broken processes. This is exactly what we're doing again now with AI. If you don't fix the foundational layer, then you just get faster rubbish.
Mm-hmm. Faster rubbish. Nobody wants that.
Faster rubbish. Yeah.
Nobody, nobody wants that whatsoever. And I've seen faster rubbish, and it's an ugly sight. So we could talk about faster rubbish and the ways to solve it all day. However, deadlines do intercede, and so I am going to fast forward us just slightly to the last question, and the question I like to ask of all of our guests on this series, because while we can certainly talk at the strategic level, and as you've done here very well, I think get specific and detailed about the areas that are really creating the disconnect and what leaders can start to do about it, including how they should frame AI within, as you were just saying, bringing that into an integrated way into a system that has strong foundations where you've identified what good looks like. You understand where you may still have some gaps, but you also know where the handoffs, the trade-offs, the processes are working well enough that AI can actually amplify goodness instead of create faster rubbish. Let's bring it home with the recommendation for go-to-market leaders. What's one action you recommend they take in the next 90 days to close that gap between strategy and execution?
Yeah, I'm not going to live this faster rubbish down, am I? That's going to follow me around now forever.
It's a good catchphrase.
so, so when I think about the CRO role, let's think about the CRO role particularly, right? The clue is in the title. The CRO role is about managing the entire revenue system, right? And the job is to keep those functions aligned. I touched on it earlier, but you have to keep those functions aligned to one operating model, right? One set of priorities, and one revenue story that the board can trust. So visibility is the prerequisite of doing that, right? So it's very easy to get caught up in the sales aspects of the CRO role without taking the broader view, right? Most CROs, certainly the CROs I know, have come up through that sales background and that's their comfort space, right? So, that's where they kind of focus, but you've got to go much broader than that. So I've always kind of believed that performance isn't about power, it's about precision, coordination, and those marginal gains, right? We talk about it when we talk about pipeline build, right? Those marginal gains, the small things you can do that will have incremental wins. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and those wins aren't the ones with the best strategy then. They're the ones where every function, every team, every customer interaction operates with discipline and speed, right? And that's what you have to get to, that consistent model where everybody's operating in the same way, in the same direction. It's not easy to do, but you've now got the power of some of the solutions that we talk about to get you to that position, right? And that's what I think you have to be. That's the first priority.
Mm. Yeah, and that's the priority before any AI pilots, tests,
100%.
new technology investments, etc., is really understanding, do you have everyone moving in the same direction? Do you have visibility into how that's going, what good looks like, and if they actually are all an integrated team moving in one direction? That's an environment in which you can apply AI and get great benefit, like we talked about the 8.5% increase in revenue. But if you don't have that foundation in place, you may actually put yourself in the opposite situation where you're losing even more and things are going wrong even more rapidly than they were before, which is certainly not a situation we want any of our listeners to be in. As you folks have heard across this and many interviews, a consistent theme emerges. Ironically, in the age of AI, the place to start is with your people and to focus on their collaboration and the system through which they go to market together as one team. That is an environment in which you can then apply AI successfully, but you need those foundations in shape. You need the visibility into what good looks like, and the team's all moving in one direction, as Stu has recommended here. Stu, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate
Thank
our
you, Lucas.
conversations every time we got the opportunity. And for all of you who joined us for this and all of the Go to Market Gap series videos, we appreciate it. You can learn more about our research at the link in the description of this video or at highspot.com. We'll see you next time. Peace.